This episode of the Huddle Breakdown is brought to you in association with the OneFootball app. The OneFootball app is the best football app on the market right now. Everything that you need on any team, in any league, is available in the OneFootball app now. The fixtures, the results, transfer news, and even stats, everything that you need on any team, any league is available in the OneFootball app. And in addition to all these other great features, the OneFootball app is now offering everyone in the UK and Ireland free match highlights from the Serie A every match week. And on top of that, they will have one free selected match on a Saturday, which will be live streaming across the app. So if you want to get all these other great features and get an opportunity to watch some Serie A football on a Saturday, then download the OneFootball app using the link in the description below. You'll be supporting the channel and you'll be getting a top-notch football app as well. Now you're welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. It is a World Cup edition of the Huddle Breakdown. No Celtic matches to look at, but plenty to talk about. We're going to be talking about Alistair Johnston, a potential right back coming into the club. Yuki Kobayashi, who has joined the club as centre back coming in from the J League. And we're going to be talking through the Celts who are playing at the World Cup at the minute as well. Confirmation tonight as we record that Cameron Carter-Vickers is in the starting lineup for their crunch game against Iran. A very interesting fixture in many, many ways. If you haven't watched the pre-match press conferences for that game, I'd advise you to go and take a look at that before the game starts. But that's not what we're going to be talking about tonight. Alan Morrison is with me. James is fully focused on that USA game, so he won't be joining us. Alan, World Cup, it's been very interesting on the pitch. It has to be said that of all the noise going into this World Cup, that the actual football, when it's come to the football side of things, has been very entertaining.
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed it. I mean, it's one of the benefits of getting older, because World Cups come along and you tend to get quite sort of nostalgic because you always remember your first World Cup, and you can place many events in your life by where you were when you were watching various World Cups. So it's always a time for reflection for me. And I've probably had a lot more World Cups than you, Enda. So my memory has to be quite good to go back all the way to, I think, 78 was my first proper one. It won't surprise people to know I'm a complete World Cup anorak. I watch every game basically if I can. So really immerse myself in it. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think one of the benefits of getting a bit older is that the way and that's also starting to do Celtic by numbers and watching games in a very different way is that I think you have more of an appreciation for what's going on the pitch. When I was a kid, I think I used to watch the World Cup, and if it wasn't like 3-3 or 4-3, it was a crap game. If some Brazilian lad didn't stick it in the top corner from 30 yards, you felt you'd been sort of cheated, and that's kind of way that you watch football when I was younger. But now I've got a much more sort of subtle, I suppose, appreciation for what's going on. So there's something of interest in most games. I mean, there's been one or two that have been dire. I think that first week of the tournament, nobody wants to lose their first game, right? So that tends to lead to some defensive football, and we saw that on a number of occasions. Nobody wants to sort of take risks, really, and so there's a few 0-0s and a few sticky matches. But the second round of games were by and large very entertaining. And then the game tonight, the sort of decider between Ecuador and Senegal was just fantastic fun, because each goal basically changed who went through. So that's the sort of thing you want. The sad thing is that when they expand the World Cup to 48 teams, a lot of that jeopardy and therefore fun is going to go out of it, because I think a lot of teams in third place will get through. So you're going to see a lot of sort of nothing games, unfortunately. But overall, I would say I've really, really enjoyed it. And yesterday, especially, or a couple of days ago, should I say, yesterday, over the last couple of days, there's been some absolute classic games. The Cameroon Serbia match, the South Korea Ghana game, Croatia Canada was great fun. Belgium Morocco was dramatic. So there's been a lot of good games as it's gone on.
Yeah, I find myself trying to be as positive as I can about things when it comes to what you mentioned there about the fact that they're expanding the tournament. When I'm watching these games, I can't help but think that, like, why do they want to change this absolutely brilliantly chaotic tournament that anything can happen. It's such a bizarre situation when you're allowing third place through in the group stages, and it happened in the Euros a couple of years ago. Ireland actually benefited from that when they got through by finishing third place in the group. But in reality, it just makes things a little bit less entertaining and a lot less jeopardy in the games as well. So, but yeah, absolutely, there've been some absolutely brilliant games, and working from home has revolutionized my World Cup watching, because even when I'm in the office, even though the game would be on because I work in sports media, you don't get to watch it as much, whereas I just have it up on the TV right beside my laptop. And I think I've watched every game bar the first game, which was, by all accounts, a terrible game anyway. So
yeah. Yes, you've done well. I mean, I know it's difficult when it's on in the background. You don't really concentrate, and you miss a lot of the nuance. I mean, as I say, I'm unfortunate. I'm not working at the moment, so I'm able to watch all these games. It's been great. Although I have to say, today was the first day that there wasn't 4 games on, and I got so much done this morning because of all these things that have backed up that I should have been doing that I haven't been.
Yeah, really not a fan of having to pick and choose between these games.
Yeah, the upside to the 48 game thing is that countries like Ireland and Scotland, Enda, for example, have probably got a little bit more of a chance of getting through, and then even getting through to the knockout. But it will encourage those teams that are good at grinding out points here and there, unfortunately. So I'm not sure, but I mean, I remember it when it was 16 teams. The world's a different place now. The breakup of Yugoslavia, Soviet Union, and etc. There's so many more countries in the world, and the development in parts of the world like Africa, Asia, Caribbean area, and so forth has just been phenomenal. So these teams deserve a chance. I think the number of Asian teams might double or something like that. I might have got that wrong, but sure, somebody will correct me. But maybe it's African teams. So that will be interesting, because I think still there's a lot of the other thing that occurs to me when I think back to like the 70s and 80s is that you would see a team like, I don't know, Tunisia or Algeria or something would qualify, and you wouldn't know any other players. They might have one lad that plays in the French league, but essentially they'd all be from that country, and they were all good technicians, but they didn't have a lot of fitness, and the goalkeeper was always rubbish, and you know what I mean, and it was all that sort of thing. But now you watch these teams, and it doesn't matter where they come from. There's a bit of a homogeneity. I mean, you've got globalization, capitalism, globalization, and that obviously impacts football. That Senegal team had, at least half a dozen players that play in the English league, and so they're all big, they're all strong, they're all athletic, they're all got a good level of technique, and they're all well organized. And what's been great to see is that countries like Ghana and Senegal, again, if you go back even 20 years, probably, maybe even further, these teams tended to hire these sort of mercenary, usually Eastern European managers that you'd never heard of, but had a great reputation for managing sort of international teams. But now they've got their own coaches from their own people, which I think is brilliant. Cisse for Senegal and Ado for Ghana. So that's good to see.
Yeah, so I think this is the first World Cup ever where every African nation is managed by an African manager, as opposed to European managers coming in and managing them. So that's very interesting. And just a final point on one of the points that you're making on the World Cup is Robbie Brady, the Irish midfielder, did an interview with the 42.ie, and he spoke about the quality of the opposition nowadays. And his point was just that there's nobody shite now. Like you might come up against a San Marino or a Gibraltar, and they'll be, they're very beatable, but they're not terrible in the same manner as they used to be. Whereas I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot more quality in the middle ground teams at this World Cup, especially from the likes of the Asian qualifiers and the African qualifiers have all been really, really strong at this World Cup. So maybe the time of year benefits them. But we'll move on from the World Cup, because we want to talk about the Celtic players at the World Cup firstly, and the potential Celtic players playing at the World Cup as well. I've tried not to call him Alistair Campbell multiple times, but Alistair Campbell just rolls off my tongue whenever you say the word Alistair. Alistair Johnston from Canada. Canada obviously now knocked out of the World Cup. He is on his way to Celtic, if you believe the newspapers. It seems to be a done deal. A right back coming in from the Canadian League, Canadian International, and it looks like a $3 million deal by the sounds of what's being reported. This is coming at a very interesting time, Alan, because before the World Cup, I think the last podcast we recorded, we were speaking about Josip Juranovic and how he had how talks had broken down between him and the club for a new contract. So what do you think this means for Juranovic and his future, and what Celtic are doing in the transfer market?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said many times before, I don't think the manager, I don't think Ange Postecoglou is, I think he plays games, and I don't think he's difficult to read, really, in many ways. And he's signposted that the way he sees the club growing, as we've talked about, is to be more, it's essentially to increase churn in the transfer market. So that means more players coming in, more players going out. The more players you sell at the optimal price point, sorry to use these sort of horrible economic terms, but then the more you can then upskill the squad by spending more on incomings. So, but to do that, you need volume. You need a greater volume of change, really. And there's no excuse for Celtic not to do that, because it's not like if Celtic sell one player, suddenly you're worrying about not beating St Mirren at home. Sorry, St Mirren's a bad example this season, but you know what I mean. And no disrespect to them, just picked a name out there. So, you can afford, especially in the domestic sense, where Celtic have got an enormous economic advantage over the rest of the teams in the league, that you can probably put up with a bit more churn. And it's the only way you're going to, as I say, upskill the overall squad. Now, Juranovic is 27. He's an experienced international. His next contract is likely to be his last really big one, probably, in all likelihood. So it's an important move for him. He's under contract for at least another 4 years. So there's plenty of value there in terms of resale. And if he wants to go, as we know from the manager, he doesn't care what your name is and what your reputation is. If you don't want to be there, then it's goodbye, and we'll get someone else in. So it's all signposted in what he said about increasing the volume of attrition in the squad. And to me, if I was looking at it, the players that I would think would be candidates to sort of actively move on and replace would be the likes of Juranovic, because of his age and the fact that being at a World Cup, this is probably the optimal time to sell him. Even and James got pelters for this at the beginning of the season, but he was spot on. He talked about Giakoumakis. Giakoumakis has come in. He's had not only been really successful in the Eredivisie, he's come into Celtic and been really successful. He's got a Champions League goal. He's 27, 28 years old. The other aspect of it, and to be brutally frank, is have those two players, and I don't know anything about Giakoumakis leaving. I'm just using him as an example of another player that you might feel is at the peak moment for trading, as an example. But going back to Juranovic, he isn't actually that much better than Ralston. That's the thing. So it's almost something that you can do at fairly low risk. There's really only two attributes that Juranovic has that marks him above Ralston, and they're important attributes. Clearly, one is just his recovery speed, and the second is his speed going forward. I mean, we saw with the assist that he got for the goal against Canada, where he made this diagonal run right at the heart of their defence, caused absolute chaos. Eventually, it was a bit of a skirmish, laid the ball off, and the striker Levaya, I think it was, scored a really good goal. So that's what he gives you, which obviously Ralston doesn't, and that raw pace is the one thing Ralston lacks, unfortunately. So it does mean that if you think about Champions League level, do you think of that as your benchmark? Yes, Juranovic had some of those physical attributes, but in all other respects of his game, he's no better than Ralston, really. So to me, it would make a lot of sense to trade in that way.
Yeah, and then I suppose it'll really depend on what Celtic eventually get for Juranovic and whether or not we see it as a good value deal and good turnover. If it is $3 million for Johnston, what are they going to get for Juranovic? Somebody made the point, you mentioned speed and Juranovic's speed. Somebody made the point on Twitter that this season Juranovic has come up against Mudryk, Nkunku, Vinicius Jr. and now Alphonso Davies. So they're not slow players. So I think we saw Juranovic get burned a couple of times in those 4 games. 3 of those came for Celtic and 1 for Croatia the other night. I think we can forgive him for being outpaced by some of the fastest players on the planet.
No, absolutely. But again, if you look at sort of Johnston as a counterpoint, what does he give you? So he's someone who he's 5'11", he's wiry, he's athletic. Read about him being a sort of street hockey player. He's tough. He can play. He's quite flexible. So he played for Canada. He played on the right side of a back 3, but really he at the same time played like a wing back. The way he bombed forward, he's got a good sort of pace about him. So for me, he would be an athletic upgrade on Juranovic in that he seems reasonably quick, but he's just a bit bigger and stronger. And again, coming back to, if you look at the teams, even look at Saudi Arabia. I mean, when Saudi Arabia, I first saw them in a World Cup, again, they were all sort of tall, slim, elegant lads, but they had no muscle on them. And, they were beautifully skills on the ball, but they were just out-muscled every single time. And now you look at them, and they're just like beasts, they're just like absolute, big lads, muscly, strong. The same as, a typical German team, the same as, for example, Senegal, even Ecuador. Ecuador got a tough bunch of players. So that's the model. And I hate to keep going on about athleticism because I think done a lot of work in grassroots football. And that's the thing that annoys me most, is that athleticism is valued over technical ability. But when it comes to the professional level, you've got to have the complete package. And if you want to compete, you want to compete at that level, unfortunately. So I'm not saying that Johnston's the super athlete, but he looks more like the type of player that I think Celtic need to have in their team, that they're kind of lacking, that sort of roundabout 6 foot, still got the pace, strong physically and good technically. That's the model that we need to sort of upgrade to. We've got a lot of players in our squad who've got a lot of good technical ability, lacking in the physical side. Or are small but not quick either. I don't mind you being small, but you better be bloody quick. You know what I mean? And as I say, don't. I hate that aspect of it, but it's just the reality of it. You've got to have that. I mean, just look at the teams that we played. Yeah. I mean, Real Madrid didn't just beat us through having better technical players; they beat us physically as well.
And yeah, 100%.
Leipzig especially. Yeah.
Yeah. You can be small if you play like Pedri or Gavi, but if you're playing at a level where Celtic are purchasing you, you're probably not at the level of Pedri or Gavi, so you're going to need a little bit of physicality as well. We'll move on to the centre-back situation at Celtic, because I suppose the dipping into the Canadian League shows you again that Celtic are looking at markets that they otherwise would not have been before Ange Postecoglou came in. And once again, they're dipping into the Japanese market with Yuki Kobayashi joining the club. That's already confirmed. He's coming in as a centre-back. What do you think this means, before we get into what kind of player he's going to be, what do you think this means for the future of Maurice Jens and Stephen Welsh at the club? Because obviously Jens is just here on loan. Do you think this means that Celtic are going to potentially move him on at the end of the season? Or could it be Stephen Welsh who's sacrificed and sent to Toulouse, who I think were interested in him? Udinese were interested in Stephen Welsh at one point in time as well. So in the sort of Ferris wheel of Celtic centre-backs, who is leaving and who's staying, do you think?
Yes, this is something, as you know, I look at periodically, and I've got a framework for sort of assessing centre-backs, which I quite like. I think it seems to fit the eye test quite well. In summary then, for me, we're in a situation where we've got, Carter Vickers on the right-hand side of the defence, who is as good as any centre-back that we've had in the last sort of 7 years that I've been collecting data. So in terms of the benchmarks of players that would be up there, it would be the likes of, sort of Van Dijk, peak Chris Julian, peak Ayer, Benkovic in the short time that he was on loan with us was excellent. That he's up there in that sort of level, and to me that suggests that company suggests we've got somebody there who ticks the boxes as far as we'd be happy to go into battle in the Champions League with Carter Vickers. The problem is on the other side, where at the moment we've got 3 players, none of whom, in my view, are of the same standard, or even in the same part of the same benchmark as Carter Vickers. Unfortunately, they've all got different strengths and weaknesses. They're not all sort of homogenous. But ultimately, if I'm ranking all the centre backs using the framework that I use, they're kind of at best in the middle, and at worst, actually, pretty poor in terms of defensive actions as well. Now, what's apparent to me about Starfelt is that he's got attributes that I think the manager likes, which I think are the sort of non sort of performance metrics. The sort of, he's a good guy, he likes him in the dressing room, he's a kind of leader on the park, etc. So I suspect that's why Starfelt is favoured. My summary on Jens, and bear in mind that because of injuries to others, Jens has played in just about every single game. In fact, up until I think 3 games ago, he was actually leading the team in terms of minutes on the pitch as an outfield player. It was only Joe Hart had more minutes. So I've had a lot of data to compare him with. He's had to play with a few partners. My summary of him would be, he's just not that much better than what we've already got, right? He's not that much better than Starfelt. He's not that much better than Stephen Welsh. So for me, I don't know what the agreed release clause is with Jens, but I just don't see enough there that it's worth, buying him to punt Stephen Welsh. So Stephen Welsh has got 2 advantages. One is he's Scottish and homegrown, and therefore he counts towards the squad. There's a number of homegrown players you have to have in your squad for Europe. And the second is where Stephen Welsh stands out is his passing, his forward passing, which I've talked about before. He's noticeably more better at getting the ball forward from deeper positions than the others. But unfortunately, his defensive stats are really no better they're worse actually than Jens, and about the same as Starfelt. So Kobayashi being added to the mix as a left-sided, left-footed centre-backs is a really interesting dynamic. Now, this is a guy who's, I'll be honest with you, I've never seen him play. But just looking at it, he looks like a player who's established himself only this season, really, the last 2 seasons, in the J League. He's been pretty much an ever-present. He's got some 6 games in the African equivalent to the Champions League, Asian Champions League. So he's got that about. I think he's got 1 cap, maybe for Japan. I know they play quite a lot of games, and he's young and he's left-footed. So he's got all that going for him. But I would think, given, if you remember how long it took, what Hitati was, because he's coming off of a pre-season or a close season, because their season finished a couple of months ago. So it's going to be unrealistic to expect that we're going to throw him straight into the first team. So I think it's going to be continuing to be probably Carter Vickers and Starfelt for the foreseeable. But I think it's going to be interesting to see. I don't see us keeping, 5 of them, for next season. But I don't know, is this guy going to be as good as Carter Vickers? Because that's the benchmark we need to aim for, is to have another centre back who's of a similar standard. And as I say, I don't think Starfelt and Welsh are that. Welsh has still got some development and growth in him. Whether he's at 22, 23 willing to hang around and wait, I don't know. And in the meantime, the boss seems to trust Starfelt. So I think it's a really, really interesting area. And I think there's a lot of toing and froing got to happen yet in that part of the team.
Yeah, 100%. And if you look at the way that we've used Abelgar very scarcely throughout the season so far, I think you could probably put the same to Kobayashi, and that there might be a little bit longer to wait before we see him push for a first team place. Benjamin Lynch in the comments, of course, correcting me because I had a massive brain fart earlier. Alistair Johnston is joining from the MLS, not the Canadian League. It just had Montreal in my head, Canadian League. No, it's the MLS he's joining from, but the point still stands. We're in markets that we weren't in. We weren't buying players from the MLS before this. So thanks to Benjamin for correcting me on that, because that was a brain fart on my behalf. Just to finish off this podcast, because it is a little bit of a shorter one, we have a new man across town, and an old man, if you want to put it that way. Michael Beale, Mick, has joined the Rangers.
Is it Mick or is it Mickey? Mickey or Mick? What are we settling on?
I think he
Mick or
prefers.
Mickey?
I think he prefers Mick. I think he prefers Mick. So
Mick,
Mick
okay.
Beale is joining Rangers as now their first day manager. He was obviously Steven Gerrard's number 2 there. Going to have to delete some tweets when I credited Michael Beale with any success that Steven Gerrard had at the club. But look, he went to QPR. He did quite well initially, and now the form has dropped off quite dramatically over the last number of weeks for QPR. What's your general feeling with Michael Beale coming back to Rangers as their manager and taking over from Gio? Because I mean, it was only a matter of time. I think it's surprising financially that Rangers did decide to pull the plug on Gio van Bronckhorst before the end of the season. So another new man for Ange Postecoglou to go up against.
I mean, firstly, it's kind of amused me in a very childish way, all these Twitter handles are having to delete the van piece and replace it with Mick. I'm looking forward to that. But I thought it was an astonishing decision to sack Van Bronckhorst, really, because he's since he's taken over. They obviously won a Scottish Cup. They got to a European final. He's been given very little in the resources really to rebuild what is an aging squad. You've got the problem of aging. You've sold 2 of your most athletic, talented players and not been able to replace them. And you've got players that clearly don't want to be there, that are kind of working their ticket. So given all that, and then you also has to be acknowledged, had a lot of injury, well, similar to the sort of injuries that Celtic had a couple of years ago. And even last season, actually, that they've been insulated from in recent seasons, but it's kind of come home to roost in this season, and especially in the centre back department. So I think if you give all that context, put all that context together, to me, it's an extraordinary decision to sack an experienced manager who asked for support when he'd navigated 2 difficult Champions League qualifying ties, and then was given nothing to support the team, despite all of that revenue, you'd think, coming into the club. So I was really surprised, to be honest with you. And like you say, this whole escapade of sacking Van Bronckhorst, his backroom team, Mackay and so forth, and then obviously having to pay QPR to get Mickey Beale and his backroom team. I mean, you're looking at the guts of £6 to £7 million based on what I've seen to actually do all that. And this is a team, this is a club that clearly doesn't have any money to buy players, and this is another enormous outlay and a real risk. I mean, the guy's got just under 22 games of managerial experience under his belt. So yeah, I think it's an extraordinary decision.
Yeah, well, it is extraordinary to the point that you make, the transfer situation with them, and that they weren't buying any players in, but now they will have to fork out about 6 million, because I think the reports are there was 4 million to sack Gio in the first place, and then you have to pay a championship club, a fairly high up championship club, to bring their first team manager, that the manager who had rejected Wolves in the Premier League before this. And on top of that, you've got 2 lawsuits as well, which I think one of them for the Australian tour is in the region of 1.5 million. And then the deal with the kit supplier is in the region of 3 to 4 million as well. So Rangers are immediately out of pocket around 12 million as a result of this. And you just have to think how much closer they might have been this season if they had spent 12 million on players. It's quite a strange situation going on over there. But in relation to how this affects Celtic,
if they had 12 million to buy players, yeah.
Well, that's a fair point. And how this all relates to Celtic,
because so I mean, I think Enda, we're going to do a bit of a special on this, so we'll probably dig into this discussion on finances a little bit more later on. Hopefully, we're trying to set something up on that. But essentially, the bottom line is they got to a European final. They had more games, more home games, more revenue in the history of the whole franchise. Like over they had more revenue this year than ever before, and they still made a loss. That's the bottom line, right? So those are the facts. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to wrap this up, I think there was a tiny bit of a delay there on the things. In how this relates to Celtic, we actually around this time last year, or maybe a couple of weeks in between, we're speaking about Steven Gerrard leaving for Aston Villa and Gio van Bronckhorst joining the club. And at the time, I remember I made the point that in one way or another, Rangers were actually doing quite well at that point. In one way or another, this will affect Rangers and how the team performs and how it impacts Celtic. Is there's a game coming up in December, so I think that'll be it's a very quick turnaround for a new manager to be faced into the Glasgow Derby. So Ange, he pretty much sorted out Gio over the last number of meetings between the two clubs. Are Celtic just so far ahead that it would be quite unexpected if Michael Beale was able to turn this around?
So, I mean, listen, it's imperative that Celtic stay true to their strategy and their direction, right? The manager wants to implement a process whereby, the player trading is, the famous player trading model is uplifted and accelerated. He wants to continue to improve the squad. I think we saw quite clearly this season that our team isn't good enough to compete at the Champions League level. That is the bold facts of it. We competed well. There was a lot of very similar to Canada, actually. Canada were one of the best teams to watch in the World Cup and played a very attacking, direct form of football, but ultimately were undone. So, and that's very much a mirror image of what happened to us in the Champions League. Just not quite good enough, just came up short. So if we're going to get better, and that's the manager's stated goal, then we have to stay true to ourselves, continue to invest in the squad. But that will mean that occasionally some favourites will get sold, because that's the only way we're going to generate the necessary revenues to then invest back into the team, because we know that all the other streams that we've got are limited, and so the player trading model is where you can really sort of make a difference. I mean, we might have a good year 1 year and get through to the last 16, but you're not going to get through to the last 4. Very rare. Maybe once in a generation. You can't bank on that. Whereas what you can bank on is having players that people are interested in, selling 2 or 3 of them, but then reinvesting the money and constantly, gradually uplifting the quality of the squad overall. Whoever is the manager across there is irrelevant. We just carry on with our plan.
Yeah, that's exactly how it should be as well. And as long as Ange Postecoglou is at the rein, I think that is how it's going to be going over the next while, as he is in charge of Celtic. A slightly shorter podcast this week, because obviously there's no football, but that's I think pretty much everything that we wanted to cover on the show tonight, unless there's anything that you wanted to get a final point in on it.
No, just a shout out to all my friends in Wales. Just thinking of you tonight.
Yeah,
we'll be there.
Big match, big match for
I'm
Wales.
I'm sure you're the same, Enda.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I will not.
Yeah.
Huge match for Cameron Carter-Vickers as well. If they beat Iran, then they will be going through along with England if England get a result against Wales. But let's keep the fingers crossed that doesn't happen either. So not petty at all here on the Huddle Breakdown. Alan, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the World Cup. And as we've said, we will be doing a sort of a special episode on finances and Celtic's finances, Rangers finances, and how it compares to the rest of the SPFL as well. Hopefully that'll be in the next week or so. We're trying to get the guest arranged for that. And there will be a podcast / video on the channel very shortly, probably tomorrow, maybe Thursday, about Alistair Johnston, who we will be doing a breakdown on as a player with an analyst. So that's what is to come on the Huddle Breakdown on the YouTube. If you want to get those videos, you can subscribe to the channel below, hit the like button as well, and leave a comment if you enjoyed the video, or if you did not enjoy the video, or if you disagree with me, just leave a comment below, and we'll try to get back to as many people as possible. And the podcast of this will be available in the usual channels as well. Alan, thanks very much. We'll chat to you later. Good luck.